Okay, welcome back, and thank you. And I thank the panelists for the last really engaging session, and the questions were extremely stimulating and clearly bring up conversations that I think we'll have over the next couple of days. This panel is on investigative journalism, techniques and challenges, and I'm going to introduce each person separately before they give their short talk. So I'd like to start with Zubaida Ismail. She's Ghana's correspondent for Reporters Without Borders and also an environmental journalist. She's got 13 years experience in environmental investigations. She's a member of the Environmental Investigative Forum and Ghana's only female journalist covering forest and marine biodiversity. So welcome, Zubaida.
Thank you. Okay, so is it up?
I think you too.
Yeah, just
Right. So I should go there, right?
Yeah.
so
Have this. Have yours?
you want me to help?
Yeah, I need help here.
Okay.
Oh, this is your laptop.
Yeah.
So I'm using that one.
This one.
Oh, okay.
Is it easier to start with Alex?
No. Just trying to get a computer.
Do a slideshow. Perhaps that way. Yep. Oh. So I thought the slideshow would be better, but I can still see it's the writing's so small. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Okay.
Hopefully the rest.
Hopefully, the rest. So okay, I think it's just
Okay, just the beginning, I guess.
just the beginning. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. So my name is Zubaida Ismail. A small girl coming from Ghana, the center of the world, and then if not heard where Ghana is in West Africa. When you hear Ghana, what comes into your mind? Kwame Nkrumah, the Gold Coast, and the Black Stars. And now, or recently, we've earned ourselves something we call Dirty December, where you have many diasporans coming to Ghana in December just to come and have Christmas. So yeah, I will stand here to say, you guys should come this December. We are openly ready to host all of you for the Christmas. Well, that's just by the way. So I'm Zubaida Ismail. I've been working as a journalist for 13 years. 4 out of the 13 years as an investigative environmental journalist. And this was because I used to report only on gender and social justice. And then 4 years ago, I sat back and I was like, okay, gender, social justice. I'm talking about what the issues affecting women, persons with disabilities, children, and all that. But then also living in the northern part of Ghana, I saw how women and children were bearing the brunt of water shortages when the dams are dried up in the dry season, when there is no water to feed the cattle and all that. It was the women and the children and the persons with disabilities that were struggling. So I sat down and I was like, okay, why don't you add environment and climate change so that you are a complete package? And then you're able to do this. So I saw the nexus between those two, and I decided to add environmental journalism. And I think it's been a very successful one. 4 years on, I write articles and people think I've been doing environmental journalism for a decade, but it's just 4 years. It's because of the passion and dedication I have given to the work. My boss there is, I'm also Ghana's correspondent for Reporters Without Borders. I've done it for 5 years and that's my boss. I believe he will tell you that I'm one of his best correspondents on the continent. So, but anyway, welcome to my presentation. So I'm just going to quickly take you through investigative journalism tools and techniques. So I keep asking this simple question. Is journalism investigation? Because sometimes when people hear investigative, when you're in a room and then you have journalists and then you say investigative journal, you have some of our colleagues feeling bad. It's more like we're putting more spotlights on the investigative journalists and not talking about them. But I've always told them that journalism itself is investigation. Okay, that's what you set out to go and do in the first place. You go out to go and ask questions. You go out to go and find solutions. You are holding people accountable, isn't it? So journalism itself is a form of what? Investigation. So I tell people that don't feel weird when your colleague is being identified as an investigative journalist and you are not. It doesn't make you lesser of a journalist. It's just that what puts you aside is the techniques and tools that we use. They are the only different, but if not, we are all journalists. We are all investigators, and we all come together to hold our people accountable. So you can see, I said, because every journalist sets out to unravel issues, seek answers, clarity, educate, inform, hold people accountable, and so on and so forth. So yes, we are all investigative journalists. And what we call the conventional, so the everyday journalists, I call them the conventional journalists. And then you have the investigative ones. And what do? We all do investigative. We use observations, tip-offs, whistleblowers, interviews, archives, artificial intelligence surveys, polls in our line of duty. So we are all the same, literally. But like I said, what puts us aside? The tools and techniques that we use, okay? So while a conventional journalist may use simple information gathering tools, okay, and techniques like observation, tip-offs, interviews, archives, immersion, and an investigative journalist may use some sort of sophisticated tools and techniques, okay? So I don't want to be doing more reading, but then what I'm trying to say with this point is that when I set out to do a story, okay, I go out to interview Alex, right? Maybe I do that because he said something in this conference. If journalists were here after all these, you see them rushing to the panelists with mics. It's simply because they picked notes whilst the speakers were talking. And how did they do it? They did it by observing, listening, being part of it. And after that, in the course of doing that, they noted what they would want to ask questions on. And then they will literally do those follow-ups. And how do you do the follow-ups? By interviewing. When you do the interview, what do? You edit, you do all those things. So literally, it's basically that. But then the investigative journalist, if an investigative journalist was part of us, the difference would be that maybe that investigative journalist wouldn't go ahead and just start asking questions. They'll go and sit down and make reference to some of the laws that perhaps our colleague who joined via Zoom talking about the laws that we inherited from the colonial masters. An investigative journalist will go and sit down and read those laws and identify the difference. Those laws, those time, those period, and what we have now. Identify the differences, the loopholes and all that, and now go and seek information. And so that one will be more of in-depth, time spent, well-written article, which is questioning people rather than doing what has become more of PR journalism that most of our colleagues are doing. Globally, it's not just in like what the American journalists are doing right now for Trump. So what are some of the tools that we use as investigative journalists? We use big data mining platforms. For example, we have the iHub by the International Consortium for Investigative Journalists. Of course, I didn't mention that I'm also a member of the ICIJ, and I took part in the Pandora Papers, which was done about 4 years now, or 5 years now, yeah. And ICIJ has a platform called iHub. It's a data mining platform where we go there to seek information. Unfortunately, it is not open to everybody. You must be a member before you have access to that particular platform. So you have search platforms, you have open source intelligence, which is your simple Google search engines and the Bings and all that. You have Tor. We have web scrapers, extensions of Google Chrome used to extract data from websites. We've got the open refine where you use to clean messy data. Because the difference again is that even when it comes to investigative journalism, we have data journalism, where you've got that category of journalists who really do not go out to interview. They're given a set of data sitting somewhere, like the ICIJ will call you together, host you in a hotel somewhere and say that, guys, we've got this in iHub. Give you access into iHub and tell you, go and find stories from your country. And so you will spend the whole time, of course, you work with deadlines, to go into that raw data, identify. They'll teach you how to key in your country, how to key in topics, which will bring out the information that you want. Then you will now sift through that. Sometimes we have over 1 million data sitting in there, and you sift through that just to come out with a story. Then you now do the legwork if you have to go and interview people or get them over the phone to interview them and ask the questions. So that is also another form of investigative journalism, which is different from the usual investigative journalism we have, those that usually just sit and sift through huge data. And you will use tools like Open Refine, where you will use to clean the data and all that. And then, of course, you have Google Spreadsheet. Well, let me make this confession. I am an investigative journalist who is so bad at using Google Spreadsheet. Forgive me, buddy, I have to be truthful. And then what are some of the techniques that we use? We have the undercover, where people, I don't know whether I want to use Anas Aremi or Anas, because his is an extreme undercover one where he doesn't even show his face at all. We've got some undercover journalists, even in Ghana, that are my colleagues, that when they come in here, I am the only one who knows them. But they don't wear mask. But this is the thing about Anas Aremi, and if you heard about him, the thing about Anas is that for those that he trusts, like when it comes to Senozo meetings, Anas comes without a mask because he knows we don't use phones there. Nobody's going to snap a selfie with him or do anything with it. So he comes without his mask. But in the public, he wears those masks. So you've got that type of undercover. And you've got people who, from the beginning, because they know they want to be investigative journalists, they don't put their images out on social media. So they can still do investigative journalism using their names, but you will not find anything traces about them on social media. So we've got those ones as well who don't know. So not every investigative journalist covers the face or do not use their name. We've got people who still use their names, but because they don't have any trails on social media, you are unable to find them. So we've got that. We've got the immersion. Immersion is simply living with the people, living the story. Okay, so there's a story I'm going to use as a case study where my colleague had to go into a hotel. All right. It wasn't planned that he should go. It just happened. And we said, okay, you know what? Just stay there and do this story. And again, we've got Anas working with the African Eye, BBC African Eye, where he had to go into a prison and pretend, just because he wanted to see the conditions in the prison, and pretend to be, did I say prison? He went to the psychiatric hospital. And he wasn't mad, sorry for using the word. He was mentally okay. But guess what? We met last 3 years at a Senezo conference, and he said they nearly dragged him mad because he was being injected with the medicines that were supposed to be for people who weren't stable mentally, just because he wanted to tell the story from inside. So he immersed himself with the story, and he was able. And so there are times you have to do that. And even as a conventional journalist, there are times you have to. I was in Kenya to do a story on indigenous knowledge and climate change, and I went to the Ogek community, the Ogek people, Mount Elgon. I stayed there. That place is the coldest. I mean, on top of the mountain, the coldest you can have. In 3 days, I was sick. I was actually brought to Ghana sick, but I had to do it because I couldn't sit in Ghana to do it. Or even when I got to Kenya, I could have just said I was going to stay in Nairobi and do the story. But there are some of the stories you need to be with the people. So I lived with the people. I was eating their food. Of course, it's African food, so it's not so different. But if you are a West African and then you go to East Africa, it's the worst experience you can have when it comes to food. We are all Africans, but our food entirely different. The West African, we love spices. Someone just said, we love spices. And then you take a whole West African girl into East Africa that eats flat food. Like there is nothing. And I ate it for 4 days. I struggled, but this is even within Africa. But that's how far you have to go when you want to do immersion. You just have to tolerate it. So we've got that, then we've got the in-depth research, like I said, when you're dealing with the big data. We've got document analysis still under big data. And then document analysis, for instance, in US, if I don't know whether the White House does that. So in Ghana, we've got State of the Nations address every year, where the president will have to come and tell us how we are faring as a country. And then usually when they do, after it's usually a huge document, sometimes 50 pages. When he is done, we sit back and we scrutinize the document and do fact checking and all that, and also look at stories we can follow up. Okay, so those are the documents. You can also get some of these documents, even from here, right here in your library. You just walk in, you have a story or something you've been reading about, you're not getting clarity. Yours is to just go to the library, sit down, sift through those books, and then get the story that you've got to. It's all part of the document. And you also have what we call the documents that are usually released by entities during their annual general meetings. That is also one place that you can really get a lot of information to do your investigations as a journalist, because that is why the executive directors lie a lot. And so when you sit down at their AGMs and they throw the figures at you and they make it paint the color as if they've done a real man's job, when you pick the data, the document at the end of the month, after the big grammar, and you sit and you're like, those guys just threw dust into our eyes, And you've got the fact checking and verification. You've got tools to do fact checking and all that. So the investigative journalism itself is fact checking. But because of the fake news tag we have, right, where people are coming at journalists to debunk everything and they try to question your credibility, you've done a real work. They will still come and put the fake news tag on it. So then you have to, even when you think you are very sure, you still have to fact check your own story. And what I've learned as a journalist growing up, they said, cross-check 3 times. If you are not too sure, drop the story. It's that simple. And it happens that you really think you have a story, okay, and you've put in all the effort. But after doing your cross-check, you realize that this one, let me speak PG, it'd be like you do junkie work. It's like you've wasted your entire time, you've wasted your time all this period, and you have to drop the story. It's not a must that the story should go, because it's about your credibility. Your credibility is on the line. And if you make any mistake, they're already looking for a reason to tag you as a fake journalist. And so don't give them the chance to. So you do the fact checking. And you've got your security as a journalist. I think just before we came here, I was complaining on the platform that I'm there with my senior here, the Global Investigative Journalism platform, where I said, I think ever since I went to, so I've lived in England for 2 years. I actually just went to Ghana 2 weeks just to come here. I relocated to Ghana just 2 weeks ago, and I'm here. And I have this strong feeling that my phone is being tapped, because when I'm out of Ghana, I have very beautiful network. I talk clearly and all that. And then when I go home, it's like every if I make a call every 2 minutes, it drops. And I ask people, and they say, no, as for this, it's not network. Because if it is network, other people should experience it. But I seem to be the only one experiencing it. So I have this strong feeling that my phone is, and I don't want to put it on you, because like ever since you got in touch with me, I'm beginning to have those Chernoh. Because of the so many security and the scrutiny about him, I like, is it because I got in touch with Chernoh? Because like, seriously, what are you tapping my information from? Nothing, actually. So yeah, you've got those encrypted messaging apps that you need to also put on your phone for protection. I've got all those things. I speak with Alex on Signal. I don't do anything with Alex on normal WhatsApp. But like I said, they will still find a way to get into you. And then, of course, cultivating sources. It's very important to cultivate sources in the work that we do. Now, this is a story that I said is a case study. It's called COVID-19 Heist, a case of Ghana, Nigeria, and Syria. We all heard about COVID-19. It's a two-part story we did. It was a cross-border investigation. I was the only female there. We had two male Ibanga from Nigeria and then my Sierra Leone colleague. And that is a story that I say, we didn't even plan it. I had the idea of doing that story. What was the idea? Of looking at how African governments were extorting from their own citizens. It had nothing to do with foreigners. Extorting from their own citizens in the name of that thing that when you traveled into a country, they test you, you are positive, they put you in a hotel.
Quarantine.
Good, quarantine. In Ghana, do you know what they decided to do? Even when you say that I have a house and I live alone, so I can live in my house and there's no risk of me transferring it, they said, no, they will put you in a hotel. And they were putting people in 5-star hotels and bailing them to pay 5-star hotel bills. And so we wanted to see who was behind this, who was benefiting from that and all that. And I couldn't get into the hotel. Then Ibanga called me one day because I'm a Ghanaian journalist and I'm known and connected. Zubaida, I am at this hotel. They have forcefully taken me to the hotel. Can you call the minister? I want to get out. I said, no, you're not getting out. Stay there. This is a story I've been wanting to do. Once you found yourself there, you add a story. Pretend you are sick even if you are not sick. And let's get this story. And in fact, what he gathered in just 4 days of the quarantine was massive. And that's what we used to do this story. So sometimes people will say the hypothesis and all that, but sometimes it's just by chance and you just have to take the chance and then do it. So that's the story. That's why you have my president there. We got rid of him in the last election. And then you have of course, they are all now ex-presidents actually. Buhari is an ex-president and all that. Challenges, personal safety, physical abuse, internet hacking and all that. You have legal suits. Thank God there is now an African something to protect journalists. Funding challenges, we won't talk about that. Bullying. I was glad when you said that. In this particular story, I wept as a woman. I was the only woman in there. I did the first draft and someone sat somewhere and said that, okay, even though, yes, you did the first draft, but it was wrong for you to have put your name first. I'm like, but how do you expect me to sit and do a draft and put your name first? And then go and put my name? It's naturally, I'll put my name first. Story by this, then and put the rest. And for that reason, I was queried. Just because the person thinks he's a senior, he's a male. And that was the time I told myself I wasn't doing any cross-border investigations again. And I never tried it again because it was mentally draining and all that. And an absence of trusted collaborator is the same thing. Even when you think that you've gotten external collaborators, sometimes you need to be careful. It's always about your mental health as well. And for me, it broke me and I said, I was done. Thank you.
So I think we'll do all of the panelists and then we'll take questions. Thank you, Zubaida.
Thank you too.
I'd like to introduce Alexandre Brutelle. He's a senior reporter at Examination, investigating health threats and empowering communities. He's co-founder of the Environmental Investigative Forum, a global network of environmental investigative journalists who initiated #BurningSkies, a collaborative organization on gas flaring in the Middle East, North Africa region, and the African continent by Western oil and gas majors. So thank you.
Thank you.
And you've got about 12
Okay.
minutes.
Hey, so I'm Alexandre Brutelle. Most people know me by the name of Alex. So if you want to chat later, just call me Alex. I co-founded and directed EIF for the past 5 years. It was initiated as an attempt to develop an ICIJ equivalent for environmental investigative journalism. Now I joined the team at the examination actually 2 weeks ago. It's a US newsroom investigating health bits all around the world. But I still keep my hat as a chair of the board for EIF till we manage to fundraise for a team. I'm coming to you not as the director of a really big organization like the ICIJ. Probably the annual budget of EIF is about half of the salary of the director of the ICIJ or some other organization. So it's to tell you it's a really small organization, but with big projects and large collaboration in the pipes, and also that we've made in the past. So that's what I want to tell you about today, about environmental collaboration, where we developed partnerships that were connecting different regions together. We just a few words about EIF. So the idea was to develop this global consortium of environmental experts, but also investigative journalists, and to foster new reporting tools, new reporting methodologies, and also frameworks for collaborations. The idea with EIF, even if I'm French and based in Paris, was to have a shared governance with regional investigative units that have proven that they were able to do quality investigative journalism. So that's why in the board of EIF, we have organizations like the Chernoh, which is a West African investigative unit. We have Oxpeckers in South Africa that are a really pioneer organization in environmental investigative journalists. We have their equivalent in the Congo Basin called InfoCongo. We also have the Society of Environmental Journalists in the US. The idea was to have a shared governance when developing EIF a bit more than 5 years ago. The four main things that we do is networking and cross-regional cooperation. So we have a signal group when we share tips. Actually, Chernoh and Zubaida are members. So if anyone has a concern for security or is looking for a database, is looking for a European partner, an African partner, Latin America partner, they post a message in the group. Back then in 2020, we had 10 members. Now we have 115. I think mainly from Africa, actually. And the rest mainly from the EU, not so many US members, unfortunately. And we have this signal group to coordinate, ask questions, ask for help to find, or even to fundraise stories, also posting grants proposal that we see and that could be useful for members. We do training, mentoring, all around the world, really. The idea being that, and I'm going to talk about this a bit later, but that since we have a global network, when there's a need for training, let's say in West Africa, well, we have a West African member coming there to do a presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have a US member that could do it, so I came here. We do training and mentoring and tool development. I'm going to be talking about this tomorrow in the next session, but we do some environmental monitoring tools that can be used for investigative stories. Like a tool we developed and published called Mine Alert Africa, which is basically a big scrape, a big data gathering we did of national cadastre of African mines for 18 countries in Africa, and that we reprojected on a map of protected areas to be able to enable story leads for journalists. Meaning that if Zubaida wants to see, how many mines are overlapping with protected areas in Ghana, well, she just goes on the tool, she looks it up, and she can tell which company is doing it and where is this company based and who are the owners of the company, basically. And of course, we do investigations, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. So we only do investigations at EIF on top of the other things that I mentioned before. Sorry, when they have a cross-regional potential. So it means Often we have colleagues in the EU telling me, Alex, I want to do a story in France about water pollution. And I'm like, I cannot help you because it doesn't have this cross-regional perspective. We wanted to do this because creating EIF and looking at the global non-profit scene in investigative journalism, which is a really small scene actually, where everyone knows each other, we identified there was the missing segment because you have all these organizations that I mentioned before in South Africa, Oxpeckers, Info Congo, and so on and so on. But there's no global network to make them cooperate on cross-regional investigations. So that's why we developed EIF. And when we go for an investigation and for a specific story, we always have this requirement that it needs to have this cross-regional perspective. It can be EU/West Africa perspective. It can be a fully global perspective, etc., etc. And since we're talking about techniques, and I will be talking about challenges in a bit, I just want to share a quick technique among many others that we teach in our trainings, which is looking at global companies. As a French, there's nothing better than to find a story lead than looking at Total Energy or French ExxonMobil and looking at what they are doing worldwide. This is the best way to make a global story and to find regional partners to cooperate with around that. That's just an example of what we did. And we did that with Perenco. Perenco is Total's Energy little brother. It's not, I'm wondering how many of you know about this company, if you can raise your hand. Yeah, one. Yeah, it's in Gabon, Cameroon, UK, Peru, Colombia. It's based in they have activities in 19 countries. In 14 countries, their activities are threatening protected areas of different sorts. Ramsar sites, UNESCO sites, national park, animal reserves, and so on and so on. The idea was that since we had investigated Perenco in Tunisia years ago with EIF, we were wondering if we could replicate this investigation globally now that we had the framework. So the hypothesis we wanted to verify was, is Perenco systematically doing environmental harm the way they did in Tunisia, operating on protected lands? Yes or no? Well, spoiler alert, yes. And they do it in 14 countries out of the 19 countries where they operate. So that's an example where actually looking at a really sad aspect of the global energy sector and looking at this almost neo-colonial approach of Western companies operating in southern countries, you can twist this into your advantage to find a story lead and to tackle this company from a global perspective, trying to publish in as many places as you can in each of these countries, or at least each of this region, which we have been doing. And we did so with the support of the Journalism Fund Europe that you should really check out. I don't have any stake in the Journalism Fund Europe, but I find it really interesting because that's one of the rare story grant makers that is going to provide sufficient funding for your investigations, but also is going to enable African-European collaboration or Latin American-European collaboration, because it seems to me pretty much, and that's why we developed EIF, that everything is pretty much siloed, where there are topics where we could all team up and do some work, just like Perenco. And the story on Perenco could be done about BP, about Exxon, about Total Energy, and so on and so on. And why this series on Perenco? I just told you it's the second largest French oil and gas operator. It's a global company, the second largest in France after Total. They have repeated accounts of social, environmental, public health risks, abuse, and impacts. And after several investigations into this company, we wanted to scale up the coverage of this company. We've been investigating them since 2020, and we published the series before with all of these partners, and that represented the collaboration of 35 journalists from each of these organizations working together as a global team to make this happen, basically. The reporting outcome I told you about, and that's just some of the countries where they operate on national parks, Ramsar sites. It was Gabon, yes. It was also Cameroon, Tunisia, Congo, DRC, Peru. In many cases, these overlaps, they happen to be illegal, and the company did not report about them, unlike some of their competitors. The equivalent of Total Energy in Italy, it's called Eni. And Eni, they do have a sustainability section where they report how many overlaps they cause and how these like high biodiversity value assets are being threatened by the company. Perenco, they are not listed in the stock market, so you don't find shit in their reports. And we did this using geodata. I will have a session tomorrow about this more in detail, but it's basically finding information about the licenses, the geo coordinates, projecting it on a map. And that's something that's actually not so hard to do. I didn't go to university either, and I learned on the spot from forums just because I really wanted to get there, you know? I really wanted to know globally what Perenco is doing. So just with a few tutorials online, I could find this data, project it. And that's how we then were able to share all this information with the partners so they could do their own quality local reporting with their knowledge of their own region, their skills. Why would me, Alex, be going in Peru on some kind of fantasy trip to go in meet a tribe or something if we have perfectly efficient partners that are there? So, and one of the outcome, I wish it would have been the case for all countries where we reported on Perenco, was that the company got sued for ecological prejudice in DRC. They got sued in France for that. Now, let's talk about challenges for a bit. That's the best of the worst shit I ever heard from legacy newsroom, European medias. EIF is not a media. We are a segment connecting media together. So imagine my job is going to contact my African colleague, convince them there's a story somewhere. Then I have to convince the French media partner to do the same. I need to convince everyone that this story is worth telling. And my colleagues as well. And here are some of the answers we got about the previous investigation, but also about others. The story is interesting, but it's not surprising. It's Africa. It's not really news. It's normal there. And I've heard that from African colleagues as well. Well, if it's normal, then why would we even do this work? I said to my African colleagues. And I said to the EU legacy newsroom that I won't share the name of, but then why do you even have an environmental desk? What are you going to be talking about if it's normal because it's Africa? Then in the beautiful sphere of non-profit journalism, where it's actually not non-profit for everyone, you have some investigative units that are being financed by corporate foundations. And what you can find in the rationale of this corporate foundation that is financing a lot of climate initiatives and climate solution initiatives is going to say we need to focus on solutions, not emissions. So really, should you substitute solution journalism to investigative journalism? Is it going to work like that? I don't think so. Because you can report as much as you want on solutions. If the emissions are getting higher and higher, we're all getting cooked here. Then another one I really like, if it's not illegal, it's not really a problem. It's not worth reporting on. So let's say there's an oil and gas company completely destroying a UNESCO site or a site of high biodiversity importance where entire communities are depending on the local water sources. It's not a problem. It's not important because it's legal. These are some of the things I've heard from EU colleagues that are really annoying when you're trying to make this work happen. And then last one, always fun. It's not news because it's based on open data. There's a dependency on leaks now. So you have huge non-profit networks that are worth tens of millions of dollars that are coming to European or American newsroom with leaks on a plate saying, here's the story. Mm-hmm. They just help themselves. Even sometimes the story is pre-written, so they don't need to do anything. But us, when we come with open data, it's annoying because they need to use the data themselves. They need to find the story themselves from the data we provide to them. And they're going to say eventually, it's not news because it's based on open data. Well, if no one analyzed it before, of course it's news. Sorry for being a bit annoyed, but I rarely get to share this. We did a survey at EIF in 2023, and I thought it could be interesting also to share some of the challenges that our partners, non-Western regional investigative units, also the journalists that are among the members of the EIF network, with more than half of them being from Africa, what they find is a challenge. And you will see it's key structural issues that were reflected in the previous slide, but that have been surveyed here. So it's written in a really small way. The main challenges as seen by the journalists themselves. You can see that most of them find that there's insufficient financial support for cross-regional investigation. That means, if you're not familiar with the beautiful non-profit scene, it means this US or European foundation that is splashing large amounts of money for training. But the story never happens because it's only about training. I've been giving trainings in Africa where I've seen the same person that are over 50 years old, that are talented journalists participating to this training because this is the only time they can meet a European journalist. And instead of giving them the funding for them to work with us, they are just going to be there getting taught like they've never done anything in their life. And that's the problem. 72% say there's insufficient financial support for cross-regional investigations. I'm talking here about environmental stories because that's my main focus. Lack of available data, that's debatable because sometimes you do find that the data is there, it's just kind of hidden and it's open. And difficulties to connect with international colleagues because we are being siloed into these regional organizations. And that's what needs to be really broken. And then specifically for environmental investigation, 73% out of the 160 people that answered consider it insufficient or very insufficient. The consultation for the board members, and that's the key conclusions for this consultation we made with them. One that I found really interesting, lack of correspondence of communication and skill transferability between Francophone African countries and Anglophone African countries. It's like in the non-profit, or at least in the investigative scene, two bubbles that are, it's really hard for them to meet and to discuss. And you can see there are, depending on the region, some are more accustomed to a certain type of data analysis techniques, let's say, than others. And they identified this lack of communication as a key thing. And again, I would get calls telling me to come to West Africa to give a training. Well, why me? Because we have members from West Africa, like Zubaida, for example, that have given training for EIF. And why would it have to be me to give these trainings? So that's also a question of lack of communication and skill transferability between these two linguistic bubbles, let's say, but also within this bubble itself. That's what they said. Something that's really interesting also about environmental investigative work is that data techniques and the use of geodata is actually being pioneered by countries from the so-called global south. I think that's really amazing. You have no equivalent of Oxpeckers or InfoCongo or InfoNile in Western Europe or in the US. They don't know how to use geodata. I mean, you do have the Pulitzer Center that is, with their grant scheme, using a lot of geodata techniques. But I thought that was really interesting as well. A need to further connect local journalism within global journalism projects. I think that's really important too. That's why we try to do with the parent ecosystem investigation. And also this tiny little problem about the confusion in the donor sphere among the foundation that have the right of life and death on an NGO, and the notion that they have about climate journalism. What's climate journalism? Again, is it what we discussed before, that we need to report on solution, not about emissions? Again, I don't think so. And then I think the largest problem is that and I'm going to finish on that, the promise of cross-border journalism that was represented by the Panama Papers and the golden era of the global consortiums like the ICIJ, it seems far gone now. It seems far gone now that we understood that these networks became the equivalent of the legacy newsroom and posing the same problematic power dynamics that legacy newsroom are doing. And I've heard complaints about, and I've witnessed also problematic ways of collaborating from these large consortiums that are based either in the US or in the EU. But when we wanted to pitch EIF as a shared global governance scheme with regional ambassadors taking part in decision, it never made the cut for the donors. And that leads to a situation of extractivism that is being denounced over and over in every conference that I attend. And I don't really have the solutions right now, but perhaps we can talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Very good. We might have to have a little talk about data. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce Dr. Chernoh. He's a postdoc research fellow here at the Watson Institute. He finished his PhD in history, in medical and public health history in West Africa at Northwestern, where he was also a postdoc. Dr. Ba is the author of 2 books, notably an investigation of the Ebola epidemic, which is really not only a good work of investigative journalism, but also field epidemiology. And when Zubaida was talking, I was really reminded that there's a lot of crossover here in what we do as scientists. He's editor-in-chief of Africanist Press and an advocate for democracy and free speech in Africa.
Yes, thank you very much. This is a wonderful gathering. I think I have a lot of people here that I have to thank in the first place. Alex is one individual in the EIF. I met Alex through CIFA. And CIFA, did I get it right? CIFA.
CIFA, it's the Civil Initiative,
Civil Initiative for Asset Recovery. And I participated in a training that they organized. And why I mentioned that is because CIFA and CPJ were the first organizations to issue a statement of defense in my situation. I've been a journalist almost the rest of my life, but today, because of my work on corruption and investigations in Sierra Leone and trying to hold Sierra Leonean political elites to account, many of my colleagues, friends, classmates, and in the media in Sierra Leone consider me a politician than a journalist. So I've had conversations with press freedom organizations, journalists outside of Sierra Leone, who are still puzzled by that situation, why I have a statement from CIFA, from the Reporters Without Borders was the latest one to issue a statement on my situation last year, defending and calling out the situation in Sierra Leone and calling for the cessation of the ongoing harassment against me. I've had 200 academics from universities spread across the US, Europe, and Africa, Brazil, signing on a petition in my defense, but there is no Sierra Leonean academic who signed on that. There's been no journalist in Sierra Leone who has stood up in my defense, but there's hardly any newspaper in Sierra Leone that has not reproduced my writings in the past. There's no political party in Sierra Leone that has not used my work to campaign at one point or another. So, and there is no political party as well in Sierra Leone that has not attacked me or their supporters. So I sit in that, but they still consider me, as a politician, a threat. But I understand why that is the case. So I want to use this opportunity to thank CPJ, RSF, and all the people here who have supported me. I'm going to talk about the experiences, a part of that experience of harassment and transnational repression that we have experienced in the last at least 6 years. We founded the African Express in 2002 as a small collective endeavor, as an independent endeavor, coming out of the Sierra Leonean war to report about corruption, good governance, accountability, transparency. And we've never received any funding from anyone. We've never applied actually for funding. And we've only worked because colleagues in the media and in academia have contributed and donated their skills to whatever effort we do. So that's how we consider ourselves an independent and collective organization. One of those individuals who are very instrumental to that work and who do not even claim credit for that is Professor Wallis, who has functioned as a critical editor for some of the work that we've done. So what I'm talking here, I'm presenting, it might look like I'm the one that has done this, but it's a work of people who have donated their skills, knowledge, and expertise anonymously for the most part, who do not take credit. So I find myself at the edge of the spear, but I'm not actually the spear of this work. I've just represented an independent effort of journalists, academics, people who believe in justice, and an open society. And I carry the pain of being in the front line, but I'm not really the entirety of this work. So I want to make that known. So challenges here. But before I say that, most people, including perhaps the press freedom organizations who have defended us, came to be aware of our work, the work that we've done in the last 5 years, which is a work that is designed to interrogate the anti-corruption campaign of the current government of Sierra Leone. We have a president who campaigned and was elected in March 2018 on a promise to fight corruption and financial crimes. And then what he promised was to reduce wasteful and frivolous spending. This is a popular thing, even in the US now. Cutting waste, reducing the size of government and all of that. So we've had that in Sierra Leone 5 years ago. And why was that? The president promised that one way to cut waste in public spending is to cut down the frequency and size of international travel delegations. You have African presidents traveling to the United Nations with 60 people. This is 60 people on the official record, but then if you count their concubines, their relatives, and all of that, it will be 200 people traveling on public budget. A lot of pressure. So this president identified that as one of the problems that needs to be addressed. And we all agreed on that. At this time, when he was campaigning, my work was being reproduced by almost all the journalists who supported including he himself will tweet some of my writings. There's evidence to that. And they said, we have to also address the wage disparities in the civil service, where people with, for example, you have professors with PhDs who are paid $100 or $200 or $500 salary a month. And then you have a political party appointee with no qualification is paid $2,000 a month. So that's a huge problem. And then what happens is that the academics, PhDs with PhDs will leave the university to find a place to support a political party leader, no matter how incompetent and uneducated that leader is, as long as they can command the ethnic base and will have the potential to become president, they support that because in the end, they will be guaranteed of appointment. So addressing the wage disparities means that people will have to address the payroll and make sure that people are paid according to their qualification. That's a good thing too. It might reduce, in my view, this blind loyalty to dictatorship and incompetent leadership. So that was a promise. Reduce the pressure on the wage bill by eliminating the use of political appointments to reward party militants. And then increase domestic revenue mobilization, generate revenue from mining, from agriculture, and use those resources so that, and one way he said is going to do that is to centralize public expenditure through the creation of a single treasury account. So the presidency and the leadership will know exactly how ministers are using, how they're collecting money to be in a single bucket. So we know how much is raised, how much is going out. So you think these are very good ideas about disciplining public officials so that they could function and fulfill the purposes for which they are elected. And then what this will do is that it will make sure the country is independent, have an independent national economy, because you reduce external and domestic borrowing, where governments with all the resources we have find themselves heavily indebted. Many African countries are considered heavily indebted poor countries. So this was a very great promise that people thought, it's going to help. And we had fought against a corrupt regime in the previous 10 years, which everybody thought, okay, this is going to be a good thing. And what happened? When he assumed office, he announced an anti-corruption process. And the picture here is the previous government had been in power from 2008 to 2018. My work on Ebola is part of that effort to interrogate the inefficiency and mismanagement that was there. So everybody in Sierra Leone knows that I was on the front line of the critique and evaluating this government, which is why my work was also used by the SLPP. So a governance transition team was set up to investigate previous officials, commissions of inquiry, to hold, look into the assets and tenure of office of the former president, ministers, and leading officials. Everybody clapped for that. They were fighting corruption. Madabio, the new government, is fighting corruption. And then the Anti-Corruption Commission was now investigating and arresting people. So what was the end? The media, everybody now was scoring, the government is doing well, they are fighting corruption. But then the corruption was arresting members of the previous regime, holding them accountable for stealing public wealth. So passports of previous officials were seized, travel bans on more than 80 officials, including the former president and ministers. Properties were supposedly frozen, including houses and bank accounts of officials. So this was the news. So a new, supposedly progressive regime, if you hear it outside of Sierra Leone, you say, yeah, this is good. Now, this will serve as supposedly a deterrent for current officials not to steal money. The president is going to be very disciplined. So MCC and all these organizations were rating the government very high. And then to the extent that they created special accounts where we are told monies are being paid back. They're recovering stolen wealth and people are paying back instead of going to jail. The Anti-Corruption Commission was, to the extent that the Anti-Corruption Commissioner was even given an award by the State Department around this time. So as somebody who has been concerned about corruption, I wanted to find out exactly whether we've made progress beyond these reports. So myself and my colleagues decided that we have to intervene and examine this rhetoric as against what we've reported in the past 10 years. 2 years down the line, with this administration having gone through these investigations we need to look at. So we launched an investigation which was aimed to find out whether public policy pronouncements of the BO government reflected actual national development reality on the ground. Is it true that we're making progress in these indices that are scoring the government well? Are they accurate? Are they correct? Given BO's promises to limit government spending and waste, whether public expenditure and graft have reduced since he assumed power in 2018, and how we wanted to examine what the president has done, this new president that is an anti-corruption campaigner has done actually to address the scandalous disparities in the wage bill, the salary structure, and the bloated payroll. And the most essential thing that we are aiming at is to find out what economic and monetary policies have been put in place to arrest growing inflation, continued national currency decline. So this is one, to study the entire government, the new program, the new agenda, whether it's different from what we've seen in the previous 10 years. So we spent 12 months collecting documents, tracking records on public expenditure and financial transactions across various sectors of the Sierra Leonean economy. So the documents included, I don't know if they are legible here, but it's the national payroll of the public service workforce to see, has the payroll been addressed? Has salary disparities been addressed? Documents on budgetary allocations to government agencies and departments, expenditure records of the international and domestic travel of the president to see if this president is spending less on international travel. So some of the other records include shipping records and financial data on timber revenues It's on the question of domestic revenue generation to see if we're doing well. And records on privatization projects, including grants and debts for NIG. So just to be brief, we used these documents and studied them to try, and we triangulated the evidence in these documents with some of the other sources. And the goal was to compare the differences between the previous government and the current government to see, whether this progress that's been reported. So since then, this was in 2020. From March 1, we started our publications March 1, 2020, with the payroll. We called the first publication Payroll Corruption in Sierra Leone, where we highlighted that, in fact, the payroll has increased by 45%, because the government has loaded political party appointees, more than 300 people on the payroll who have been paid crazy salaries, more than the previous regime, to the extent that we even highlighted the president had an example that stood out was what they call the nutritionist of the president. This was somebody who was an office assistant to the president with no qualifications. And then they sat in cabinet and said, what can we do for this woman? She's been a loyalist. And now the secretary to the president created a new position, presidential nutritionist, who has no, and then made a salary that was 5 times, 6 times more than an associate professor salary in Sierra Leone. Mm. So we published the letter of appointment and the payroll showing these huge disparities. What you see here on this other side is an example of the payroll documents and transactions from the timber export account, and also comparing salaries of 30 senior civil servants who were newly appointed political party appointees whose salaries could pay the entire Ministry of Finance for 10 years. So so what? And it was a shock. So each report that we published, so far, at least we've published 125 investigative reports covering almost every, major ministries, departments, and agencies of the government, including the office of the president and the first lady. And I also will defer to Professor Wallis here, who has read the raw materials, helped to edit all of these things that I'm talking about. I believe we've lost count of how many reports we've written now, because lately we've been focusing on defending ourselves instead of writing about this. But each report we published is supported with documentary evidence, including bank statements, actual bank statements. So when we say the president has traveled with $1 million in 2020, when the COVID was happening and people were not traveling, he took $1 million cash from the central bank and traveled to Lebanon. And when he came back, they returned only $12,000. 1 week later, they sent an assistant to the president who took out the $12,000 plus another $10,000. So this is, you can read it from the bank statements and all this. So it was difficult for the government they had no response. So what I actually wanted to show here is what has been the response and reaction. You will expect maybe there will be prosecutions, arrests, but then it became difficult because the wife of the president, almost everybody from the president right down, were all involved. So this too is just an illustration of the kind of response where the president's office, the Office of National Security, was now writing to the Independent Media Commission to ask them to expressly consider our publications as an incitement to rebellion, that we are now an extremist organization, that we are finding ways to criminalize what we do. So the responses have been death threats and harassment from party supporters. Of course, there's a popular live video that was done by the wife of the president after we showed that he was a recipient of public funds, which is contrary to the laws of Sierra Leone. The criminalization of the publications here, and extralegal and extrajudicial, the creation of laws. The cyber legislation was developed in Sierra Leone around the same time that we were doing this. They will not tell you expressly that they did these laws to target the African space because they don't want to. In saying that openly, they think they're legitimizing because it will attract other organizations who stand in solidarity with our work, not to do that. So both the journalists and when we started publication, almost every newspaper in Sierra Leone reproduced what we were publishing. It got to the point where everybody was now co-opted to be part of the state. We have this evidence of co-optation coming from different organizations, from the IMF, who we are now concerned that this evidence was undermining their ability to supposedly give money. And they reached out to us, and later the people, they said, we're going to investigate. And everybody they met became a car owner. The difference to that's different. I'm not highlighting that as part of the response. So this, and what I really want to talk about is this. I do not have so much time, but I want to just explain. So apart from just the legal, the death threats from party supporters and the harassments and all that, and the criminalization of the publication, or the extra-legal and extrajudicial repression that we've experienced, and surveillance attack on our websites and all that, there was a strange thing that I observed that I want to share here, which is the government was shocked by how the access, the sources of investigations always at the center of how did you get access to the bank statement of the president. So they were coming up with different theories. One such thing was they must have hacked the system. They sacked over 170 civil servants, including the Auditor General. That's a different thing. And still, we were still rolling out the publications and documents. And then they decided to try to discredit by using fake leaks. So they created fake documents and then gave them to 3 key journalists that I knew in the past, people I've worked with, that are not part of the African newspaper, but these are colleagues that in the early days worked in various newsrooms who, that you respect very well. And one of them called me and said, oh no, I have a serious leak here. And I said, what? The first one was a journalist who is now working for a United Nations organization in Sierra Leone as a communication person, and called me and said, give me a story of a couple of documents on Standard Chartered Bank. There was supposedly a dispute relating to a transaction that was flagged, and the workers were supposedly sacked. And I asked, why do you want us? Oh, when we talk about people who stand for justice, African Specialist number 1, and you are widely read. I said, okay, give me the document. So he gave me a document. And then I read the supposed evidence, and there was a name of a company that we were tracking on money laundering thing that's run by a huge businessman who had even called me to try to bribe African Express with a different offer of that story. And I read that, and I called my friend. I said, oh, wait a minute. You've given me documents here. I cannot touch this because there's a company here that's involved that we've been investigating. So not knowing that what the journalist was doing was that he was trying to save this company, because if we had published those documents, they are not only fake, but it would also prevent us from exposing this huge corruption relating to Standard Chartered Bank and mining contracts. And in fact, it's a story that deals with the closure of Standard Chartered Bank's operations in many parts of West Africa, which we've been working on for, I would say, for the last 4 years. We haven't published that story yet. This other document that you see here is supposedly from the Financial Intelligence Unit, marked confidential. There's also another fake document that was sent to us by another journalist, and it's supposedly one that's talking about money laundering operation by the Anti-Corruption Commissioner and the president, that is supposedly, the document is claiming that the president and the Anti-Corruption Commissioner's transactions have been flagged by the Financial Intelligence Unit. They were trying to get us to publish that because by so doing, the anti-corruption's involvement in helping the president, in the use of the anti-corruption to go to cover up corruption, that these publications are going to expose, was going to be, covered up, and then will appear as uncredible and all that. So these are fake. It goes as far as the latest one was the University of Sierra Leone. Another journalist, in fact, this individual is a media trainer in the University of Sierra Leone, who called me and sent tons of documents that supposedly had a dispute in the university about the university leadership and all of that. They wanted me to publish that because they were trying to undermine my claim that as a historian, for the last 20 years, nobody has gotten a PhD in history in Sierra Leone. So I'm the one. And after graduating from Northwestern, I offered to teach for free, say that because we do not have I would like to go back home and teach for free, even if I'm not paid in the University of Sierra Leone. So they have no response to that. So what they did was to create these documents and give it to somebody who is teaching in the journalism school, who is also a journalist, a friend in the past, to send this to me that we have a dispute here, like a leak about the corruption of the administration. So publishing that is not only forged documents, but it will also mean that we are attacking the university because the university did not respond to my offer. It will undermine, that's their own response. So we tracked, and the interesting thing about this story is that they even have a legal opinion. They went to a law firm to create an advice. If I had time, I can even show this document to see. So we were able to decode the fakeness of these documents. But you can see the logo you can tell. So we compared these documents with the original letterheads of the government. And the important thing about this story, this university story, and all these forged documents, not just to discredit the publication, but it's around the same time that the government was trying to find a crime, to find a crime to justify why they can also speak to their US partners about the need to press for my extradition from the US, which the Attorney General's office has been working on since 2021. Because publishing forged documents in itself is a felonious offense, because they will say that we created the documents. You cannot justify that my source gave me this document, it came from this person or that person. The question is, you have a responsibility. The responsibility remains yours. They will say you forged the documents. Now that you don't have access to documents, they will say we've closed all the sources of the African Express. So now, because they don't have documents, they're creating documents, and they publish these fake documents, and that will be no press freedom organization perhaps will find it difficult to defend you on allegations of forgery. Neither will an academic freedom organization. So it will go outside of the ambit of free speech and press freedom. So I wanted to highlight that here, so that these are also some things we need to take into account about, as journalists, sources. How do we trust sources? How do we vet sources? This was new for me, and I have, for my last 20 years, this was shocking in my observation. So I would like to stop here and
That was great. So we've got about 12 minutes for questions.
sorry.
Sorry. Who's got questions, thoughts? Yeah, go ahead. You might need a microphone.
So as journalists, I know that, part of the goal is to inform the public, and part of the work that you do informs policy, right? I guess particularly with Alex, like what's just the higher goal or the higher vision when you expose a company like Parenco? I know you're going to inform the public, but is there like a higher intention for doing this work?
Well, yeah. So as for me and for this kind of publication, is that the company is being ultimately held accountable by any legal system that can enable this. May it be the DRC legal system, and if it doesn't work out, well, it's established in France. So what environmental NGOs are trying to do now in France is to take global companies to French courts instead of taking them to, let's say, the DRC courts. So we are trying to get this, but also ideally to get some effective policies in terms of climate and environmental protection. Yeah.
Yeah, just connecting to your question, and Zubaida mentioned Anas, the mask journalist in Ghana. I know that's the three principles of his work: name, shame, and jail. So it's not just exposing, but want to go further to make sure that they go to jail, even at some point, working for Ghana's president at some point, because he wanted something investigated, and then appreciating there's 2 presidents before this one. And Zubaida, I'm lucky I'm one of the few people so I spent 30 minutes with Anas radio interview without his mask. So each time people put some poor person's face on the media to say this is Anas, I was in that's not him and stuff. But so my Chernoh, a lot of these things you saying, they familiar. I think this is your cases, because it seems like in a lot of countries people go through this, but then you have a whole section of the country, either the media, human rights organizations, civil society, that stand shoulder to shoulder with you in those difficult times and stuff. But I think in Sierra Leone, you are alone in your fight, pretty much. And of course, it's a very powerful, entrenched government and stuff. So what keeps you going? Because it's like, it seems there is no end of your work that exposes this government. And it also looks like the government is you're going to continue to make, things difficult for Marabio and his government. So what keeps you going? And of course, it's a lot of fear. It's a lot of concern, genuine concern. What are your worst fears? What's the worst that you feel can happen to you in the line of your work?
And of course, listening to you, a lot of it, I'm thinking, okay, I thought I was going through so much, but until I hear from you, I'm thinking, okay, I think I'm doing much, much better. But what about your team back home? Because you are here and you are far away. I know you are the most wanted, but you still have a team back home. What is the situation of your team back home? I think that is also something that I'm concerned about. And I have interviewed your the anti-corruption chair. Yeah, when the government came, everyone was excited, and I interviewed him, and I was so inspired about the work he wanted to do, and I followed them on Twitter, their page, the amount of money they were recovering, and what is the situation about that right now? Because I'm not seeing that anymore. But what is the situation of the Anti-Corruption Commission as well?
By the way, he used to be so when he was in the Gambia, I don't know where I was, but I rang him. I'm like, I want you to do interview with somebody in the Gambia. Then I rang for where he said, Anti-Corruption Commission, because we wanted Gambia, then Anti-Corruption Commission was going to do. So they are inspired by him. So I told Father, I said, okay, I want you to meet this guy, interview him. But I think it didn't take long. When I rang again, I say, I'm sorry, I got him wrong. You got him wrong. This guy is what he says and what is happening now, completely different. Yeah.
Are there your questions?
Oh, okay. Then my question. Okay. Well, I don't know. I think maybe Professor Wallis is moderating this.
No, it's your question.
Yeah, but I know the point is we have not fully quantified the assault on our work, and part of it is because it's a transnational repression. It's one that we have not been able to define, but we're still piecing together that evidence, even as we sit here. But what I will talk about is our colleagues back home. We've gone to a point where ideally we will have one of our reporters here. One of our would like to have that. We cannot, because nobody will be able to identify themselves as an African Express reporter. So people who had solidarity, not solidarity, people have used our work in the media to even advance their own economic interest by radio stations and newspapers not republishing or talking about our work is part of the benefited. So I've counted the benefits in two ways. If somebody is bribed not to touch my work, okay, or not to highlight the issues that we're talking about. It's a benefit. They benefited from my work, although it's as a result of the threat to my work or to the work of the African Express, to our work. It's a benefit, although it could be classified differently. So that's one level of impact. But I think what drives our work is the fact that we believe we stand on truth, and we enjoy tremendous support among the Sierra Leonean public. Tremendous. And that's why the government is terrified. No radio station or no newspaper touches our work, but our message gets right to the level of the community. Otherwise, we will not face this. And that aggression against our work is not just waged by local political elites. It involves corporations, it involves institutions you will not imagine, and diplomatic missions as well. So I do not think there will be a point where we have to, the contradictions are antagonistic to the point that they cannot be resolved. It's because one way to resolve it, we have a choice to accept bribes or to remain silent. But it's impossible. I have my family there. My parents are still there. Everybody, almost the majority of people that I care for personally live there. They've also, some of what they've gone through, I can't explain it because they're personal stories to us. It's part of the sacrifices. But the choice is to remain silent and to allow the situation to continue. But I've done this for many years. We've seen dictatorships come and go. You just highlighted when Jammeh was in power, nobody thought Jammeh was going to leave office. So I think what I have learned lessons from these two, like the ones I'm describing, these are lessons. It deals with questions of trust and others. So we can talk about this, I think, personally, but we haven't been able to. Every day we wake up, we learn a new version of what we've survived. So, and we've become careful. I think we talk about it all the time. Why has it been impossible to stop the African Express from continuing our work? The beautiful thing that I enjoy is the fact that nobody has been able to deny a single sentence that we've published. None. Both the media, there's no one that will say that we've published a story. In fact, the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists tried to fact check an election story that we did. Okay, they said it is unproven. They have this to say fake or false. They said they say the evidence we published is true, but they do not see the transactions, how the money was transferred. So as such, it's unproven because they have I-Verify, which was funded by European organizations and various other, which is a good thing to fund fact-checking agencies. But when you use fact-checking as a politics to undermine independent media effort, is wrong. So I responded to them. I wrote to them saying, we have evidence here. If you cannot find the evidence, you do not contact. We have the evidence. And they could not. And then we provided more documentation to show that since you did not find the transaction, look at the letter, look at the authorization. This is about the elections. We had published a story a year to the elections saying that the elections are going to be rigged. In fact, the reorganization of the Electoral Commission funding, over $10 million was stolen for the organization of elections. And we published the actual bank transactions and letters and the award of contracts. And then they decided they want to use their fact-checking thing to undermine our credibility. They say it's unproven. We said, okay, we can help you to prove it. We showed them the documents and they went silent. But in private conversations with media organizations and press freedom organizations, human rights, they will try to say that we are political, we are politicians, but they cannot come forward to have that debate.
What was the fact-checking organization? What was it?
They say I-Verify. It is BBC Media something and some.
Based in Kenya?
No. It's a local effort by the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists and BBC Media Action. Yes, BBC Media Action, but funded by UNDP, Irish Aid, chain of. So how I read it personally, or how we read it in the African Express, is that many of the corporations who are involved in funding, in profiting from the corruption that we're reporting, wanted to find a way to undermine. But because they could not, individual newspapers would not do that, they wanted to use the politics of fact-checking tools to see if they could try to do that. And we responded. Letters to letters, They just went silent. We invited, if you want more evidence on how to prove this story, we have documentation. We showed more bank documents and all that. They left it there. They did not even correct it. So this is a new lessons that we learn, how also as journalists we have to interrogate ourselves as people who hold leaders accountable, but we need to also hold ourselves accountable to minimum standards of best practice and responsibility. But it's eye-opening.
I want to give a chance for, I think there's a question in the back.
Okay, hi. I'm interested in this idea. Chernoh, you said the government of Sierra Leone considers you more of a politician than a journalist. And we've talked a lot, this is more of a conceptual question, but we've talked a lot about journalism as holding people accountable, exposing government. But it seems to me that I'm seeing journalism as being a real movement builder, nation builder. We talk about this in class all the time. It does seem to be a political tool that can be used to mobilize citizens and create inclusive spaces like a state does. What distinguishes journalists from an organization like Amnesty International that has a list of demands at the bottom of a report? I'm just a little I understand, of course, that the Sierra Leone government is using crazy criteria to try to criminalize you, Chernoh, but you are inciting a movement. And I think that there's power in that. And I think that that's why journalism is powerful. Do you feel like perhaps maybe that is underestimating or that's underemphasizing the role of journalism in a society in which there's not an inclusive government, in which you are acting as a space to hold people accountable? You're acting like a government. You're acting like the real, only inclusive form of participation, movement building, all of that.
It's a great example of the fourth estate.
Yes, exactly.
Do you want to say something?
After you also.
Yeah, this is something we've discussed in class, you're right. I teach it's my first time teaching it. Also, I'm trying to grapple with that question. What's the role of the media? So I have this class, Media and Nation Building in Africa, where we're reviewing the role of the press since the period of the decolonization to present. And I think people who try to distinguish, you have lawyers, for example, the way I say it. You have people, Dabo, for example, is a lawyer, right, in the Gambia, but he's a politician. So politician is not a profession, in my view. Politics is an activity. As a citizen, you go to vote. That's a political activity. You support a political organization. Is also the exercise of civic duty, constitutional right. So you can be a medical doctor and also practice. You don't cease to be a medical doctor because you are part of a political party or you support a political party. So I think we have to also do a lot to educate ourselves about the history of the press in Africa and the historical role of the media in Africa from colonial time to present. I think that is one way I would answer it. So I've always told my colleagues who try to draw, you have newspapers here who openly endorse candidates, So, but there has to be standards of good governance and accountability that we all have to agree on. The academy, what's the role of the academy? What's the role of the intellectual in society? What's the role of the journalist in society? I think those are the questions that I grapple with, rather than, do I support a political party? Do I have a political view? I told people I'm not neutral when it comes to the politics in Sierra Leone. I have a view, and that view is I want a better society. I want a democratized society. But I do not support the two parties that are in power. My work stretches across regimes that represent these two parties. Anyway, this is a long...
It's a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So,
we're a little over time, so last question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just quickly to add my 50 cents on the issue of transnational violence against journalists, investigative journalists. We have been following and helping organizing, many of them in Africa. Most of them wanted to, go out of their country. What we have observed in recent years is that even if we managed to get them out of the country, for example, inside Africa, let's take, for example, a case in Ethiopia, and we get it into Nairobi, or a case in Rwanda, we get it to Nairobi. The issue of targeting is still there. I mean, it looks like that. I mean, there are because in Africa there are some big cities where intelligence are very developed. For example, in Kenya, I mean, in Nairobi, intelligence from either Burundi or from Rwanda are very, very, very well around. And those journalists, most of the time, they told us, okay, we are here, we are out of our country, but we are not really safe. We are still not really safe, and the challenge now is how to get them outside Africa. We are facing many challenges, for example, with embassies, with consulates and with diplomatic community and so and so. There are more or less one or two of them who have been, more attacked. But up to now, we are happy. We are still monitoring the situation, but this is really, really challenging in some big countries, and this might also happen up to those who are actually, for example, in France, we have a Togolese journalist whom we have been, supported. He's outside Africa, but recently he was just reporting the fact that, I mean, his Facebook account, it looks like his Facebook account has been hacked, and so and so and so. I mean, the challenge is still there. And now that will be my final word. And what we have also observed in comparison of the last years, for example, I mean, the emergence of the threats against environmental journalists, because of all what you have, explained here. For example, it takes place in Uganda, for example, in Ghana, in other countries like Cameroon also, because of many challenges. And this is also extraordinarily crucial. And our fear is that if there is not a really, really big mobilizations, environmental journalists in Africa will be more and more targeted, and so we need to stand up for them also. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this was a great panel. Does anybody want to respond to? I think you made a point more than a question, maybe, but it's really, I think it's very interesting to think about the other ways that a government or somebody who's being threatened by your work can get to you. It could be personally, it could be through your family, whether you move to a new city or not. But it could also be now they can hack your accounts, or hack your work even, or
intimidate the family back home.
Absolutely intimidate the family back home. And that's very hard to get around. And I think I'm just going to quickly say that for the first time ever, I have felt very concerned about what the new government here could do to me or my family. And I travel a lot, and I think about it then when there was my accidental flight that went to Freetown. And I'm glad that we were not taken off the plane, because I had no idea why we were landing in Freetown. Or my student who didn't get a visa for a couple of years, we wonder if it's tied to our work. And I don't know, but it's that kind of random fear that I think really works, because you're always prepared for it, like your phone being bugged. Or wait, who was it who said their phone was bugged?
Yeah,
it was you.
yeah.
Yes, right. You never know where it's going to pop up, and that makes it even more intimidating, right?
Yeah. So for me, I always tell colleagues that, see, and I'm being realistic. Okay, I keep saying that it is good to do especially investigative journalism, but I always say put yourself first. Mm-hmm. In every training I've had, they will tell you that no story is worth your life. Okay, so I keep telling people, especially from where we come from in Africa, you will do the stories, you put in all the work, you expose your family members and all that. He's lucky he's here with his immediate family. Extended ones they are still back home. Some do not even get the chance to even travel with their immediate family. So you have the journalists living in the US or being taken to another African country, but the children and the wife, and they are still back home. All right. So then I go like, you risk your life, you're risking the life of your family members. And to add insult to injury, the people that you have investigated, they are supposed to be arrested and put behind bars and asked to repay these monies. They're walking freely on the streets of your country. And they are even promoted. And they have become more powerful. Okay, so then so what is it actually? What's the point? So I tell people, when they come to me, somebody comes to me, Zubaida, can you tell Reporters Without Borders? I say, yes, I will tell Reporters Without Borders that you are at risk. But you know what? I always want to be a proactive person. I don't want to be a reactive person. After you've gone through this problem and we've gotten you out of the country or wherever we want to take you, what I can tell you is that whatever story that comes onto your desk, sit down and tick the boxes. It's not just about you and the fame and all that, but think about the children, the impact of that. We used to all run to the US, as you say. Now it's not even safe to be here. It's not even safe to be here. So right now, when it strikes, where are you going? That's the point. So I've always told people, it's good to do the journalism. And I love being a journalist. And that's how come I went to live in England for 2 years. I couldn't do any work. I have to still pack my things and go back to go and continue as a job. But I keep saying that when the story comes to my table, I wait. If it's going to actually put my family members at risk, I don't do it. It's that simple. It's not because I don't love my country, but like I'm saying, we live in a continent where the person that you have just exposed becomes more powerful and is promoted, as we say, to even make your agony worse. They promote this person, and then this person gets the power and has more resources to now come after you. You don't even have a better place to stay. Not talk of a better security. You have a good bedroom to sleep. So what is the point? But of course, if you have the conviction that it is worth it, then you're ready to go to prison, because they will manipulate the law and put you behind bars. Right? I believe he was in Sierra Leone, would have been rotting in prison by now. Yeah. That is the point. So if you are ready to face it and say that you want to be the hero of the story, then that's fine. You go for it. But if you don't have the heart, you might want to reconsider when some of the stories come to you. They look at who is the main antagonist there. I had a story I was working on. I will say it here. I didn't do the story because this story was, involved someone who was so connected that the dossier that was given me, I saw him in pictures with the former president in Nigeria, both Buhari and Jonathan, my own former president, the former president of Sierra Leone, like he's connected. So when I do that story, where am I going to run to? He's got connections everywhere, including here in the US. Where was I going to run to? That story is still sitting in my inbox. So the dossier is still there. I didn't work on it. It's not because of anything, but again, I'm a woman. You're going to have them coming after you fiercely. And then what will happen? I'll be the one to now tell my boss, at this time, I am the one who needs rescue. It is no longer a colleague journalist. So yes, I considered my family members. And the story, if anybody wants it, I can actually forward it to them. But that dossier is still sitting in my inbox. I've decided not to do it. And it's as simple. It's not because I don't love my country, but I've put myself and my family first. I said, I'm not doing it.
So if I can jump in on that.
The wrong person.
Yeah, I can see how she's doing. I was like, yeah, my challenge.
I mean, I can understand where you're coming from, but if we treat every story that way, then nothing gets done.
But that's what I say, weigh the stories. It's not like you're treating every story. There are some that the risk are extreme.
No, all of these people that you investigate are powerful. 90% of them, 99% are powerful, they're influential, they have money, they have connections. But at the end of the day, I know it's crazy to say, yeah, I look at my I do that all the time. But again, sometimes it's just difficult to pass on. And it's also difficult to always say that, because at the end of the day, your core business, that is to hold them accountable. Once that fear creeps in your head,
Folks, sorry to interrupt. Please use a mic in the room.
Okay.
And I also wanted to let you know that William on Zoom had a comment. If you have time to take that.
I think I was done, but I'm just saying, I think sometimes it's a very tough line there, where to draw, what to follow, what to do and what not to do. But again, if we want to pass on story because people are influential, they have money, that's basically all the stories that you're doing. Everyone that you investigate is powerful. Imagine stories about presidents, first ladies, business tycoons. If you want to pass on those stories, who are you holding accountable? And that is the principle of our job, to hold them accountable. It's tough. Like I said, the last time I said something, my dad he called me at night, and in the morning he came to my house and he was like, don't address the president like that. Don't do that. And all of them in the forums, they're calling your name. They're saying this, they're saying all of this. But at the end of the day, I said, I'm done. But next morning when I woke up, I'm like, if I'm done, everyone is done. Everyone says I'm done. What happens to our people? Yeah, it's a tough call. I don't know what we're going to do.
But then you get the reality that it gets to you at a point to say
it
that
does.
I'm done. It's over.
It does. And you get paranoid. Every time you see somebody at your gate, you think they're coming for you. Every time your car your tire gets busted, you said you just get paranoid about everything. But at the end of the day,
you wake up and you still want to go back.
So I think William online has one more question or comment.
Yes, William.
And then we'll call it a day, I think, because we're over time.
Yeah, okay. That has been interesting. What the experience by Chernoh and of course the others. I just wanted to make a comment that, of course, you see, journalism requires courage. Mm-hmm. And some of the post-independent presidents were actually journalists themselves. Mm-hmm. And in their struggle or in their agitation as nationalists, they used journalism. We have examples of them. But what our colleague Chernoh has gone through is what we have seen across Africa, like in Burundi. Mm-hmm. There are nearly 100 journalists from Burundi in exile, in some of them in Rwanda, and some are in Brussels. And the situation got so bad when there was trouble in Burundi because the president then insisted on going for a third term. He went against the media. So all the media that had called for adherence to the constitution were declared terrorists, and many of them fled to Kigali, Rwanda. It even brought a strain between the two countries, and of course other issues until the borders were closed. Now the journalists the Burundi journalists who fled to Rwanda set up a radio, an online radio. Okay. They had to be ordered to actually close that, and some of them have had to flee to Brussels. Real journalists doing good work, but then they are now classified as terrorists and people who are wanted alongside the purchased, the ones who wanted to overthrow the government. The other example I just wanted to give, like Sadibu has talked about, the transborder, cross-border. Mm-hmm. We have the case of Ethiopia, for example. I handled a case of an Ethiopian journalist who fled to Kenya. And within a month of his fleeing to Kenya, he became sick. Mm-hmm. And the intelligence system by Ethiopia is perverse. They are in Nairobi, they are everywhere, even the ones from Burundi and Rwanda. They nosed him around, followed him to the estate and so on. But unfortunately, he died. Now, when he died, we mobilized as human rights and journalist organizations. And I was the one directly in charge of trying to get the body back to Addis Ababa. Mm. Now, all the exiled journalists who had committed to trying to help disappeared. Mm. And when the family members came from, two of the sisters came from Addis Ababa, then the journalists who felt fearful here because they claimed that had actually brought in Ethiopian intelligence guys to try to follow them up. So now, even for the safety of the two sisters of this dead journalists, I had to keep moving them from one hotel to another. Mm-hmm. It was one of the most difficult. And of course, now you see, contesting political organizations can take advantage of this. There was a group in the US, it's called Ginbot. they harped on this. And now, because they were against the Ethiopian regime, they harped on this, and they wanted to use the death of journalists to criticize the Ethiopian regime, to the extent that now was under pressure from them in the US, calling me and so on, saying I should not even go to the Ethiopian embassy to get permission to get the body flown to Addis Ababa. So those cross-border issues and so on is very, very difficult. But I think one of the things we must say is that courage is required. For change to come, there must be some courage. I agree with my sister from Ghana regarding the risk appetite. You see, you can weigh the risks and so on. But sometimes when you get into advocacy journalism and you want change, then sometimes you look at it and say, okay, now, journalism will say, oh, no story is worth my risk. But you see, the risks are progressive. And by the time you realize that you have taken a step to help change your country, perhaps the risks are already that high. So that essentially is the situation across Africa if you look at many, many countries. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you to the panel and for a great day.